I knew the HOA was coming for me the moment I refused to let them pave over the creek running through my land. It was my ranch, 10 acres of stubborn, rocky Texas soil, and I wasn't about to let a bunch of clipboard-wielding suburban tyrants tell me what I could or couldn't do on land I bought with my own money. But I didn't expect them to try locking me out of my own damn property. It was around 6:30 on a Wednesday when I rolled up to the ranch gate and saw the new padlock. Not mine. Silver and shiny with a stupid laminated note zip tied to the bars. Access restricted by the West Briar Property Beautification Council. Contact HOA Chairwoman Helene Tarot for assistance. Beautification Council, what a joke. That was just HOA speak for we want control. I got out of my truck, jaw tightening. I wasn't surprised. Helene Tarot, 50-something, bleach blonde, voice like a blender full of gravel, had been circling me for months. First, it was the barn color, then the fencing. Then the unauthorized livestock incident when my nephew's 4-H goat wandered too close to the road, but padlocking my gate. That was war. I kicked the gravel beside the fence and looked up at the security camera I'd mounted 3 months ago, pointing right at the gate. Motion triggered, cloud backed. I had footage of whoever did it, and that wasn't the only trap I'd set. Back in February, Helene had called an emergency council meeting because I refused to update the ranch gate to match the neighborhood's new aesthetic guidelines. I told her flat out this is my gate, on my land, and she had no jurisdiction. She threatened fines. I laughed. Then I got to work. I reinforced the gate posts with steel cores, installed pressure sensors under the gravel, wired the hinges to send me alerts anytime they were tampered with, and I added the final piece, a hidden GPS tracker bolted inside the top beam of the gate. If that gate moved, I'd know. If someone tried to dismantle it, I'd know. And now, standing there with that smug little note flapping in the wind, I knew exactly who had crossed the line. I called out to the empty air, "Hope you enjoyed your power trip, Helene." I turned on my heel, climbed back into my truck, and drove straight to the sheriff's office. Deputy Carson knew me, and more importantly, he knew the HOA had been sniffing around my ranch like coyotes in heat. "You got footage?" he asked. "Better," I said, pulling up the Cloud app on my phone. "I got the whole show." I tapped play. There she was, Helene in her signature floral windbreaker, hair piled up like a wasp nest, marching up to my gate with a bolt cutter and another HOA crony, some guy I didn't recognize. She clipped the chain, unlocked my gate, and slapped on their new padlock like they were claiming territory. Trespassing, tampering with private property, destruction of property. Deputy Carson leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. "You want to press charges?" "You bet your badge I do." By Friday morning, the entire HOA board had been served with cease and desist letters. But Helene, she wasn't done. She doubled down. "Next thing I know, there's a petition circulating claiming I'm endangering community wildlife habitats and creating an eyesore visible from the main road." And then just 2 days later, I came home to find the gate gone. Not opened, not unlocked, gone. Ripped clean off the posts. They had no idea the minute that GPS tag moved from its fixed coordinates I'd get pinged. And I did. They took my gate, but I knew exactly where they took it, and I was about to make them regret every second of it. I parked behind the old feed store on Main, where the GPS signal had led me, an unassuming cinderblock building with peeling paint and a sagging roof, long since converted into a maintenance depot for West Briar's landscaping crews. The gate's coordinates hadn't moved in over an hour, and I figured whoever moved it didn't realize I was tracking them down to the square foot. I walked around the side lot, and there it was, leaned against a dumpster like scrap metal. My custom welded, reinforced steel gate still bearing the scorched hinge where they'd sawed through. I paced around it once, checking for damage. The tracker was still bolted under the crossbeam, blinking green like it was daring someone to touch it again. I turned toward the back door of the depot. It was ajar. Inside, 2 men in reflective vests were arguing. One of them, a wiry guy with a clipboard and sunburnt neck, looked up when I stepped in. "You lost?" he asked. "You could say that," I replied. "Something of mine ended up here." Big, rectangular, about 8 feet wide, made of steel. The other man, stockier, looked from me to the gate through the door behind me. "That yours? Was on my land until someone cut it off and dumped it here." Neither spoke for a second. I took a step forward. "You want to tell me which one of you moved it?" The wiry one set his clipboard down slowly. "We got an order from the HOA director, said it was an unapproved installation blocking emergency access." I stared at him. "So you just cut it off someone's private land without checking ownership?" He hesitated. "She said it was part of the shared perimeter, community boundary or something." I pulled out my phone and tapped open the plat map, county registered, notarized, and very much in my name. I held it up. "That's 10 acres of private land. You cut through my gate and entered without consent. That's trespassing and theft." Stocky guy raised his hands. "We're just contractors. She gave us written instructions." I took a picture of both men, the gate, and the depot's rear entrance. I didn't need them arrested, I needed them on record. By the time I got back to the sheriff's office, the deputy had already pulled the footage I'd sent earlier and passed it to the county prosecutor. And now, with the gate's location confirmed and the contractors making it clear they were acting under HOA orders, the story had shifted. This wasn't just vandalism. It was coordinated property seizure. Deputy Carson stepped into the hallway where I waited and handed me a printed document. Judge signed an injunction. Effective immediately, the HOA is restricted from making any physical modifications to your property or the shared perimeter. That includes access points. I nodded. Good, because I'm not just patching this up, I want them in a courtroom. I figured. Prosecutors taking depositions next week. You'll be first. Later that evening, I hauled the gate back to the ranch and welded it into place myself, this time adding a steel crossbar across the rear side that could only be disengaged from inside the property. I wasn't relying on padlocks anymore. But the real fun began the next morning, when I showed up at the West Briar HOA monthly meeting. They held them in the clubhouse near the development's artificial pond, a place that smelled like fresh paint and stale coffee. I walked in wearing my beat-up Carhartt jacket and boots still dusted from work. The room went quiet. Helene sat at the head of the table, surrounded by the board, 7 of them total, all dressed like they thought they were running a Fortune 500 company. She blinked when she saw me. "You're not a resident of West Briar," she said sharply. "I own land that borders it. That gives me standing, especially after what your board pulled." I dropped a folder onto the table. "That's a copy of the court injunction in case you haven't seen it." And that, I pulled out a separate envelope, is a formal notice of civil action. She didn't touch either. "You're threatening legal action because of offense," she said, trying to laugh. "No," I said. "I'm suing for trespass, property damage, and unlawful seizure." The gate wasn't just decoration, it was part of a livestock containment system. When you removed it, you triggered a secondary alert. My insurance company's already calculating potential loss. If I'd had animals out that day, you'd be looking at felony endangerment. Someone at the far end of the table cleared their throat and whispered to the woman beside him. Helene's smile was starting to falter. "I acted in the best interest of the community," she said. "Funny," I said. "Because I've spoken to 7 residents over the past 2 days and not one of them knew anything about the so-called petition or the removal order." She opened her mouth, then closed it, then tried again. "There was a vote," she said. "Then produce the minutes," I replied. "Because I already filed a complaint with the state HOA Oversight Board. If you fabricated a vote and forged resident consent forms, you're looking at a whole different kind of charge." By the time I left the clubhouse, half the board looked like they'd seen a ghost, but I wasn't done. A week later, I attended the county council meeting, public forum night. I signed up early and got a prime speaking slot. When they called my name, I stepped up to the mic and laid out everything. The unauthorized removal of property, the falsified justification, The contractors misled into violating a private boundary on HOA orders. I didn't just accuse, I named names. I submitted copies of the video, the forged documents, even the contractor statements. The council chair, a no-nonsense former judge named Ramsey, looked like she was ready to light someone on fire. After I'd finished, a few West Briar residents approached me in the lobby. "We didn't know they'd gone that far," one of them said. "Helene told us it was a safety upgrade, nothing about cutting through someone's fence." Another man added, "They've been pushing for annexation of bordering properties for months." Said it was to enhance community integrity. We thought it was just talk. I gave them my card. "If you're willing to give statements, the prosecutor's office would love to hear from you." Within 10 days, 5 residents had come forward. 3 of them had signed petitions they later discovered had been altered. One woman found her signature on 2 different versions of the same vote record, one she never even saw. That broke the case open. Formal charges were filed. Conspiracy to commit property seizure. Fraudulent misrepresentation. Criminal trespass. Helene was arrested on a Thursday morning. The news vans were already outside West Briar's gates before breakfast. She tried to hide behind a scarf and oversized sunglasses, but it didn't matter. The footage was everywhere. The HOA board scrambled to distance themselves. 2 members resigned. 1 lawyered up. The rest tried to claim ignorance. They'd picked the wrong rancher to harass. And as the legal chaos unfolded, something else began happening: calls from other landowners. Folks who'd had similar run-ins with HOAs trying to bully or annex land through beautification policies and community votes that never actually happened. Turns out, Helene's little stunt wasn't an isolated scheme. It was part of something bigger, and I had just exposed the tip of it. The courthouse was packed the morning of Helene Tarot's arraignment. Local reporters had filled the first 2 benches of the gallery, their cameras banned, but their notepads flying. The rest of the seats were crammed with West Briar residents, county officials, and curious landowners from nearby developments who'd caught wind of the scandal. I took a spot near the back, arms folded, watching as Helene was led in through the side door, wrists cuffed in front of her. She looked smaller than I remembered, her blazer hanging awkwardly off one shoulder, hair no longer sprayed into its usual helmet. She didn't look up as the charges were read out. Conspiracy to commit unlawful property seizure, falsifying community documentation, criminal trespass, coercion of municipal contractors, destruction of private agricultural infrastructure. The list went on longer than most people in the room expected. She pled not guilty, of course. Her attorney, a stiff-jawed man with a tan that didn't match his neck, requested dismissal on procedural grounds. The judge shut him down before he finished the second sentence. Trial was set for 6 weeks out. After the hearing, I stepped outside and found a group of West Briar residents waiting near the steps. One of them, a middle-aged man in a faded polo, glanced at me and nodded. "We've started organizing," he said. "Tried to hold an emergency board vote last night, but the interim chair walked out halfway through." "Let me guess," I said. "She was one of the ones who signed off on the removal order." "She was the one who drafted it." I nodded once. "Then you've got more house cleaning to do." He passed me a folded sheet of paper. It listed a meeting time and address, not the clubhouse this time, but a resident's garage. The board had lost control of its own community. Good. By the end of the week, my attorney had filed a civil suit in district court. Not just against Helene, but the HOA as a corporate entity. That's when the real discovery started. Turns out, Helene had been quietly buying up easement rights around the outer edge of West Briar. Not in her own name, though, through a shell company registered in Nevada. The name on the LLC filing, a man who died 3 years ago. His signature had been forged on every document. I brought that straight to the DA's office. When I walked in, Assistant District Attorney Keisha Lang didn't even let me sit down. "You're telling me she used a dead man to acquire property rights?" "Easements, mostly. Narrow strips running parallel to the community boundary. but a few cut through unincorporated land that wasn't for sale. She bribed a county clerk to falsify the records. Keisha pulled out a yellow legal pad and started writing. "You have evidence?" My title agent pulled the transfer logs. One of the parcels lists the decedent as both grantor and witness. She paused mid-scribble. "That's not just fraud. That's a felony-level forgery and possibly wire fraud if the transfers crossed state lines." "They did," I said. "The holding account's based out of Phoenix." She looked up. "This goes beyond HOA antics. That's what I've been saying." Within 48 hours, the district attorney's office had opened a financial crimes investigation. The county clerk who approved the land transfers was suspended pending review, and the HOA's accountant. She resigned and vanished the same morning the subpoenas hit. The more they dug, the uglier it got. Helene hadn't just tried to annex my land. She'd been positioning the HOA to absorb multiple adjacent parcels by claiming they were unclaimed buffer zones. The only thing stopping her was legal documentation. When it didn't exist, she created it. The next week, I was called to testify before a grand jury. Not just about the gate, but about every document, recording, and conversation I'd logged since this began. I laid it out piece by piece. The fake petition, the contractor's statements, the GPS data, the altered vote records, the shell company, the dead man's name. When I stepped out of the courthouse that day, the lead investigator walked with me to the curb. "You know," he said, "you could have just replaced your gate and let this blow over." "Yeah," I replied, "but then they'd just do it to someone else," he nodded. "Well, you didn't just stop them. You blew the lid off a property scam that could have stripped half the county." A week later, indictments dropped for 3 more people. 2 HOA board members and a real estate broker who'd helped Helene orchestrate the fake easement purchases. The broker tried to cut a deal, but the DA refused. They wanted full trials. They wanted precedent. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, things had quieted. No more strange cars parked near the fence line. No more unsolicited letters. The gate stood firm, reinforced again, this time with a new camera mounted inside the crossbar, watching both directions. But the ripples kept spreading. A local news channel ran a special on the rancher who turned the tide, and I started getting calls from landowners in other counties. Some had been fighting their HOAs for years. Others didn't even realize their boundaries had been altered until they checked. That's when I got a call from a man named Roy Vargas. Elderly, soft-spoken, former Army mechanic. Said he lived about 20 miles east, outside a development called Willow Cross. They'd been trying to fine him for unauthorized equipment storage because he kept a rusted tractor on his back lot. Thing hadn't run in 20 years, but it was his dad's. He said the HOA came one day with a flatbed and tried to haul it off. He chased them off with a shotgun. Now they were suing him for hostile behavior. I told him to send me everything he had. By the following Friday, I'd connected Roy with my attorney. Turns out, Willow Cross had borrowed a few pages from West Briar's playbook. They'd backdated a landscaping ordinance to make it look like the tractor had been in violation for years. I brought the documents to Ada Lang. She leafed through them, then set them down. "You think it's the same network, same tactics, same types of shell companies, same forged signatures. Wouldn't be surprised if Helene trained them." Lang raised an eyebrow. "We'll expand the investigation." That was the point where I realized this wasn't about one ranch or one HOA. It was systemic. A quiet, creeping land grab disguised as neighborhood management, and it had been going on for years. Lang put together a task force. County auditors, state investigators, even a few feds. They started cross-referencing property records across developments. Patterns emerged. Same LLCs. Same notaries, some of whom hadn't renewed their licenses in years. One signature appeared on 17 different documents across 4 counties. The deeper they went, the more names came up, and at the center, a nonprofit registered under the name Civic Stewardship Foundation. On paper, it was a community improvement initiative. In reality, It was funneling money into HOA boards across the region in exchange for quiet land access agreements. Agreements that never saw the light of day. They raided the foundation's office 3 weeks later, and suddenly, Helene Tarot wasn't just a rogue HOA chair gone too far. She was part of a statewide land laundering operation. The trial date arrived and Helene's lawyer tried to delay again, this time citing emotional distress and media bias. The judge denied it. Jury selection began the same afternoon. I was called as the first witness. I walked into that courtroom and took the stand. I didn't dress up, didn't wear a tie, just wore the same canvas coat I'd had on the day I found my gate missing. The prosecutor asked me to recount what happened. I did, every detail, every decision, every trap I'd laid. Every step Helene took that walked her straight into it. The jury listened, and when I stepped down, I didn't look at her. I didn't need to. She knew I'd won the moment she touched that gate, and this time the whole state was watching. The courtroom had been cleared for 10 minutes when the bailiff returned with a single sheet of paper. He handed it to the judge, who adjusted her glasses and read it in silence. The room waited. No one moved. Even the air felt like it was holding its breath. Helene sat at the defense table, shoulders rigid. Her lawyer stared ahead like he already knew. The judge folded the paper and spoke. On all counts, the jury finds the defendant guilty. There was no outburst, no gasp. Just a slow tide of murmurs from the gallery, the kind of sound people make when a storm finally breaks after weeks of pressure. Helene didn't say a word. She didn't flinch either. But the color drained from her face like someone had pulled a plug inside her. The judge turned to her directly. You abused your authority, falsified legal documents, and misled your community for personal gain. This was not an isolated lapse in judgment, it was a calculated scheme, executed over several years. Sentencing will occur in 2 weeks. Until then, you are remanded to county custody. The bailiff stepped forward. Helene stood slowly, her lawyer still frozen beside her. She was led out the same way she came in, through the side door, hands restrained, but this time she didn't look down. She looked at me. I stared back. Not with triumph, not with anger, just finality. She had no more moves left. Outside the courthouse, the wind had picked up. Reporters were already waiting on the steps, but they weren't looking for me this time. They circled the DA's office staff, trailing microphones, calling out questions about the broader investigation, the one now reaching into multiple counties and implicating 24 HOA boards across the state. I slipped past them and made my way to the truck. I had a meeting to get to. The town hall in Cedar Junction was packed that night. Not with suits and officials, but with farmers, mechanics, linemen, and small town folks who'd had enough of getting steamrolled by committees that treated bylaws like weapons. We weren't there to vent. We were there to organize. I've got a motion ready, said a man near the front. We push for full transparency laws on HOA finances, mandatory reporting, no more shadow budgets. A retired surveyor leaned in. And we need a way to contest annexation attempts before they hit the county record. Some of these plats are getting redrawn without property owners even knowing. Someone across the room raised their voice. How do we stop them from doing it again? I stood up. You make the cost of corruption too high. You make them explain every vote, every dollar, every change to a map. You make it public, and when they try to hide it, you expose them. A few people clapped, not loud but solid, real agreement. A woman in the second row turned toward me. You planning to run for office or something? No, I said. I'm planning to make sure the next Helene Tarot never gets that far. The meeting went late. By the time I got back to the ranch, the moon was high and the gravel crunched under my boots like dry ice. I walked the perimeter, flashlight sweeping across the fence line. The new gate stood where it belonged, solid and untouched. The crossbar release was hidden under a welded panel now flush with the frame, but it wasn't just about the gate anymore. The state attorney general's office had announced a task force. They'd already frozen the assets of the Civic Stewardship Foundation and shuttered 3 of its regional offices. Arrests followed. One HOA president in Brookvale fled the state. Another in Pine Hollow tried to claim she'd been duped, until a ledger was found in her garage detailing payouts made through subcontractors. The pattern was clear. Exploit gray areas in HOA bylaws, fabricate compliance votes, and file just enough paperwork to make it look legitimate until someone pushed back, until someone trapped the trap. The district court judge handed down Helene's sentence 2 weeks later. 8 years with no parole before 5. She didn't contest it. Maybe she knew it would have been worse if she'd tried. In her absence, West Briar's board collapsed. The remaining members resigned one by one. A temporary oversight committee was installed made up entirely of residents nominated through open ballots. They passed a motion to dissolve the HOA within 6 months, pending audit results. That audit uncovered nearly $600,000 in undocumented transactions. I only saw the inside of that community once more when I was invited to speak at their final meeting before dissolution. I stood behind a folding table in front of 50 residents and told them everything I could about how it started. Not with a gate, but with a quiet assumption that no one would fight back. Afterward, a teenager approached me, probably no older than 16. He hadn't asked a question during the meeting, but now he held out a phone with a blurry picture on it. It showed his grandfather's house, backed up to a wooded lot that had been reclassified as a development zone without their consent. They said the trees were diseased, he said. But they never tested them. Can they do that? Not if you catch them in the paperwork, I told him. Get a copy of the reclassification order. Look for the environmental report. If it's missing, that's your first crack. He nodded and said nothing else, but I could tell he was already thinking 3 steps ahead. That was the real victory. Back at the ranch, I finally took down the extra cameras. I left the pressure sensors in place, though. Not because I expected trouble, but because I'd earned the right to know if someone ever tried again. The mail came lighter. No more threats, no more fraudulent notices, no more glossy pamphlets covered in fake smiles and slogans about community progress. Instead, I got letters, thank yous, stories. A woman in Fairview who reclaimed her workshop after being fined for non-conforming exterior paint. A couple in Eastfield who got their HOA board recalled after discovering it had been rubber stamping permits for a private developer, all while denying residents the right to build sheds or fences. They weren't all victories, not yet, but they were fights being fought now, out in the open. Months passed. The fields turned green again. The creek behind the barn swelled with spring runoff and then retreated like it always did. Life settled. Then one day a man showed up at the gate. He was dressed in jeans and a collared shirt, clipboard under one arm and a badge hanging from a lanyard. "Name's Dawson," he said. "I'm with the State Property Integrity Commission. We're compiling case studies. They said you might be willing to talk. Depends on what you're asking." He glanced at the gate behind me. "How'd you know to trap it?" I shrugged. "Didn't know, just had a feeling someone might try something stupid, so I made sure I'd see it coming." He smiled, not smug, not condescending. "Just respectful. We're rewriting the oversight standards," he said. "HOAs will have to submit to independent review every 2 years. Full transparency, counties will be required to verify annexation claims with surrounding property owners." "Took long enough." "It did," he admitted. "But it started here. You set the precedent." I didn't say anything, just looked out over the fields, the barn, the gravel road that led away from the house and into the hills. Dawson flipped open the clipboard. "One more thing," he said. "They're offering advisory seats. Folks with first-hand experience. You'd get to help shape the new laws." I considered it, not because I wanted the title, but because I knew how fast these things could spiral when no one was paying attention. "I'll think about it," I said, and I meant it. He nodded and left without pushing. I watched his taillights disappear down the road, then turned back toward the house. The wind had picked up again, rustling through the cedars like it was trying to whisper something. But for once, it didn't sound like warning. It sounded like peace.